Right, hello. So, Friday's reading, extending deepen, still looking at Judge Proof. Remember, Judge Proof is a lot like Dr. Deduction. He needs evidence for things, but you just need to prove the statements, right or wrong. So you're kind of given a choice of answers, I suppose, if you look at it that way. Whereas Dr. Deduction's got to work it out from very little. You've got kind of a starting point with Judge Proof. You are given a potential answer. You've got to decide whether you agree with it or not, I suppose, with evidence. So, we've got the text Spirit by Sally Christie, and it's just this slide here. I saw a real life fairy, he said, and I took it home in a bag. Well, what would you think if someone said that? If it was someone you knew, a friend, you might say they were joking. But nobody knew Matt Barker. Nobody could guess why he'd said what he'd said. Was he attention seeking? Was he a show off? He didn't look the type. They wanted to laugh, but that was against the rules. You had to respect what anyone said, and yet they felt he was laughing at them. Was he trying to make them look stupid? Was he taking advantage? One thing they know for certain, he wasn't telling the truth. And that was the problem. In the truth game, you had to. If you chose to open your mouth, and you might well not, but if you did, the rule was that any words that came out of it had to be true. If people broke that, then they'd better not play. As Mr. McGann was fond of saying, he could equally well have called it the trust game, because truth and trust are so closely connected. When Mickey Maloney had told them last term he'd done 79 keepy-uppies round the back of his house, they'd all had to trust that he really had. He had. Because no one, not even Dick J or Joe Black, had been there. And when Angela Poole had chosen to say that she'd watched her grandpa actually die, she was trusting them to be understanding and ask only sensitive questions. They did. But even so, Ange started crying and Mr. McGann stopped the game. He had a right to do that. He could do that now. But he didn't want the new boy to think that that was all there was to it. He could feel the anger around him, and several people had put up their hands. Joe Black, a nice enough lad, thought Mr. McGann. But Sparky, what would he ask? Something challenging? Something to show he was nobody's fool? This fairy, where'd you find it then? How'd you catch it? There you go. So, just a little bit of a help for anyone who's not quite sure. It sounds like it's a bit of circle time at school, and Mr. McGann has made this game up called the truth game, but it could be the trust. So it's an open place where you can say something. People have to trust that you've said the truth, but they ask you questions. And it sounds like we've got somebody new to the class, and he said that he's seen a real life fairy straight off. And people are wondering, well, is it true or not? Are you taking the mick out of our game here? So, Matt is a friend they all know. True or false? Why? Well, I've just accidentally told you that one, haven't I? Matt here. Nobody knew Matt. There you go. It clearly states, well, we can have that as false. No one knew Matt. There you go. Easy. Number 2. They think he's lying about seeing a fairy. True or false? Why? So why do they think he's lying? Well, there's nothing here specifically, but it's the thing he said, isn't it? He's seen a real life fairy. So, number 2, do you think it's true or false that he's lying? That they think it's true that they think he's lying, isn't it? True. They think he's lying. Because he says he's seen a fairy. Oops, sorry. Whoops. Dear me. That was awful handwriting. Anyway, fairy. There you go. So there you go. Number 3. Find a piece of evidence that backs up Joe could sometimes be a show-off or argue with people. Now Now, first of all, we've got to skim read and find Joe. Well, Matt's there. Mr. McGann. Mickey. We've got Joe here. Joe. Joe was a nice enough lad, thought Mr. McGann, but Sparky. What would he ask? Something challenging. You could put the teacher. So the teacher thinks Joe is Sparky. And now you're going to have to say which I think means. I mean, a spark, you're normally not expecting it, so it's a bit unpredictable. And lively. Now that question is only easy if you know what the person means by spark. If someone's a bit sparky. But yeah, it essentially means that you can be a bit unpredictable. You know, quite a live wire. You're quite active. You're quite on it all the time. But you can always just, sometimes can be, like it says, a bit show off or argue with people quite well. He's got a bit of a spark to him. There's something to him, if that makes sense. Number 4. Find a piece of evidence that backs this one up. People thought he was making fun of the game. Well, it's kind of here, isn't it? Everyone felt like he was laughing at them. Everyone felt like he was trying to make them look stupid. The answer's around here, isn't it? So, making them look stupid, taking advantage. They felt, so they feel, or they felt, that he was making fun of them. Although that's, how are you going to answer this? How are you going to prove that? It's a hard one to actually write down, isn't it? Oops, wrong way. They felt that he was making fun of the game because of what he had said, which is the fairy thing. That's a hard one to answer, though. In terms of structuring your answer, that's quite tricky. Number 5. This is a game created by a teacher, true or false? Well, it's got to be, hasn't it? Mr. McGann, fond of saying that it could have been the trust game. And Mr. McGann, it says down here when something happened, he also stopped the game. So Mr. McGann's clearly the teacher, he's clearly in charge of the game. And the fact that it says he could equally well have called it the trust game insinuates that he's had something to do with creating it or introducing it. Okay. So for number 5, true. And I would put because he seems in charge. Oops, sorry, my computer went a bit slow then. He seems in charge and feels like he could have named it something else. I'm not going to write, my computer's going a bit slow. So something about naming it. About naming it. The last one, create your own true or false statements. I'll have a look at those. So, I don't know whether you think these are more challenging than dot deduction or not. I think sometimes they can be harder to word because you've got to answer a certain statement. Whereas when it's dot deduction, it's a lot more open and you can just put, I think this because. Whereas you've got to say true or false or find evidence for this particular thing, and I think that's harder to write. I'm not particularly a big fan of some of my answers there. I don't think I've either gone into enough depth or I don't think I've actually made myself clear. It might be that some of us need to stop and think about our answers a bit more before we write them. Certainly not having one-liners, other than maybe that first one, false, no one knew Matt. I think some of these answers could be tricky in terms of how you word it. Okay, so have a little think, and I'll have a look at your answers. We might have a little chat about it in our live sessions today as well. But brilliant, well done, fantastic, guys.